Alright, so I almost got this thing all wired up again. I had to fix the vortex coil because when you go and put the individual sleeves on every single wire like this right here, the two things soldered together may not make conductivity. So what happened was inside here, after I'd bunched it all up, covered up, I didn't have any contact again to the other side. These two wires are connected together at the end of the coil, and then these two wires are connected at the end of the coil. So this is like a positive and negative, and this is like a positive and negative. But I don't really use them that way. On my PoE coil, I put the input in like it's a microphone. So it's the audio amplifier. This is the input to like a speaker jack, you know, like you plugging in a radio. In my case, I'm plugging in a frequency generator. Goes into the input. I also have another input here for the other things I need to hook up on the coils themselves. This one right here on the outside is a input, and these coils right here are outputs. So they kind of work like speakers in that sense, where you take the two ends of the wire and then you're hooking them up to the audio. But in my case, I have to hook them up into these little potentiometers. And these are audio amplifier potentiometers, so they're kind of a little bit different. They actually are their own little amplifier. And the good thing about this is right there is the circuit to connect it. Requires like, it doesn't require a lot of voltage. So the good part is I'm not actually going to hook up voltage to this. I'm going to come off with the positive and go into an antenna that picks up the wireless electricity from that thing and then transfers it into the audio amplifier. The second one is the ground. I'm just going to actually make an earth ground that's a little bit different. I don't know if I can actually attach the earth ground into the earth itself, because then it takes away the wireless electricity from the Tesla coil that's inside there. But each one of those things has to be hooked up this way. So this is a left and a right speaker, and this is my input, and this is my output. So I could turn them on and off. And then the same thing with this one. It's got to have an input potentiometer like this little one right here. So I can turn this up and down. And then the other one, which is the speaker output, which it doesn't go to a speaker, it just goes to the output of this. So this is a speaker output. This is a center speaker, a left and a right. So you have power, you have input, and you have output. Input's like plugging in a radio, but we're plugging in a function generator, and then it would play out to speakers. So we're not hooking them into speakers, we're actually hooking them into coils. So it's kind of like a loop feedback system, because if you ever held a microphone in front of a speaker, it feeds back and does crazy stuff. So the PoE coil is a speaker and a microphone. One coil that's spinning one way is the speaker. One coil that's spinning the other way is the microphone. Creates its own magnetic field, plus it's amplified by the magnetic field of the Tesla coil inside there. And then this can have much more rotation and spin in the middle. I mean, I've already tested it out just with audio frequencies, and there's not that much rotation in here. There's a heavy, strong magnetic field about 6 inches to 8 inches away, the whole thing, which is actually pretty good for magnetics. But amplifying it, since it's outer magnetic field, you can amplify that with wireless electricity and audio feedback. So this is the audio feedback that loops itself from the frequency generators that are playing into the output and in the input from the microphone itself. Each one of those coils over there like I said, is an input and an output. So they act the same. Each one of them has current going to it. And probably about, when I did the test with the meter and I turned the Tesla coil on, I get about 1.2 volts to about 3 volts of DC power. And it's a little bit different than regular DC power because obviously it's wireless. And so it fluctuates and does weird things. It's enough to turn on an LED light. If you're the ground and you're holding the LED and you just kind of put it next to the thing, even if you took this little LED light and you separated it, the long piece is the positive, the short piece is the negative. So this goes to earth ground, this just goes to an antenna, and the wireless electricity is enough to power the little tiny LED light. But you gotta understand, like, that's not any electricity, you know, to power one little tiny LED light. So you're not really creating free energy or anything. I'm exciting energy is what I'm doing. The whole purpose of this project was to excite electrons, to create like a field of magnetic field that can pull in more electrons with plasma. To me, that's like an energizer or like an amplifier of energy. You're not going to see a lot of the things that it can do, but you can see it through the audio output once it's hooked into an actual speaker. And the actual speaker will be playing what's going on with this and the plasma and all the coils. It basically kind of is, because it's a feedback loop system into itself, I can distribute what I want and where I want it to go with switches and potentiometers. So that's kind of how this is all working, because in the end this will go on top of there. I'll also have a little speaker with a cymatics dish in there and a pan in there where it can play, and you can look and tune it according to the frequencies, or you can tune it with the volume or the potentiometers themselves. You have basically a lot of ranges to move the magnetic field to a low or high. You have ranges from moving the frequencies around inside the Tesla coil, because this goes to the Tesla coil, and resonate the frequencies in the plasma field itself, which is the wireless electricity. Higher frequencies resonate higher vibrations, and the lower ones are slower vibrations. And depending on what you're trying to create is how you would use magnetics with frequencies. Not always do you want the magnetics to spin really super fast if you want to do something in a slower function. Maybe you're trying to slow down something. You would have to use lower frequencies. People would think like if you can manipulate time, that's how you would have to do it, is that you would manipulate it by its rate. But yeah, I almost got this all done. The problem is hooking up the potentiometers in a way that they won't short out. Working with wireless electricity and plasma, even the function generator won't work correctly because it shorts out the LCD screen in here. So I kind of have to, I've built a box in there, and I made it like a Faraday cage where you take plastic. First you lay down a sheet of aluminum foil. It's hard to see in there, but there's a sheet of aluminum foil glued down to the wood, and then a sheet of saran wrap glued down. And now the electrical currents should go down to the aluminum foil, and then the plastic should slow it down from doing anything. But because I'm in an open field in the front of the box, wireless electricity just travels wherever the hell it wants to. So I have to actually make this box. It's got a plastic cover on here, so I kind of have to cover this whole thing in saran wrap or something in a way that I can protect it a little bit more from the plasma, because, or else I'm gonna have to find like a solid state tone generator. That's kind of more old school and super heavy and big and crazy looking. These digital ones are pretty small, pretty cheap, pretty easy to use. Problem with them is they don't want to work around plasma. Your generator has to be away from the plasma field. Even my frequency generators over here, I can't have any of this on when I work with plasma, because this can short out like certain channels in the pots and stuff. Same thing with this, it instantly shorts out the LCD screens, so it makes it all malfunctioning. It won't work properly. For some weird reason, if you hook up your phone with a frequency app, it works fine. Like the plasma field doesn't affect these phones. So I'm gonna have to figure out why these electronics and phones can work around wireless electricity and other things like what I'm doing cannot. And I'm sure that it's an grounding issue, and the way these LCD screens and these screens themselves work. So, I mean, this isn't really an LCD screen, so that's what makes it different. This is an LCD screen, so this tends to like short out the screen itself, causing problems for the frequency generator itself to actually function. But I've learned to cover those fields up, and there's certain materials and stuff that you can get to cover those things. And problem is when you want to use the device, you would have to turn it off, readjust it, and then turn it back on. You know, you don't have to turn the whole thing off, you just have to turn off the Tesla coil, and then you can readjust certain things and then turn it back on, and then cover this back up, because you need to have this stuff covered in order for, even the audio amplifier will probably get like weird malfunctions and shorts and stuff inside the cabling will pick up the plasma and stuff. So it's kind of funny because I have to like isolate a lot of stuff that I didn't realize I had to do, and it's a lot more harder to do that because there's so many components hooked up to this now. So now I'm having to make little Faraday tubes or some type of tube with a plastic and metal outside, plastic inside, metal outside, then a plastic outside would be the better way to do it. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do that, so I think what I'm going to have to end up doing is finding two tubes that fit inside of each other. I have a lot of stuff like that, so I'll just have to find some so I can run the cables through those into the bottom of the box. Because if I run the cables next to these coils or anything inside there, right there, the wireless electricity will pick up any of these fields around here. So they'll short out my audio cables if I don't cover those up correctly. This is kind of like what I'm realizing about working with plasma and audio. It's pretty awesome, but at the same time, they are conflicting of each other, the way they actually work. One wants to amplify the other, but in doing so, the electronics weren't built for that application in that sense. So you would have to really build your own audio driver that had more protection in it and more, really it's more resistance inside of there that can ground out the plasma fields around it or something like that. Or you're just gonna have to cover the whole darn thing up with like a Faraday cage basically, so you don't short it out. And you only can turn it on and mess with it when you actually turn it off and then turn it back on, which kind of is annoying because you want to be able to control something when it's on. But you'll be able to control the magnetic field off of this, and you'll be able to control like the antennas and stuff like that on it, and then just flip the Tesla coil back on. It's actually not that big of a deal. It's just going to be on a switch. That's the other thing. I have to switch everything out. So it's like, this has got to have a switch. This has got to have a switch. The cool part about these potometers right here is that these are switches and potometers. so they click on and off. Plus they, like I said, they are little audio amplifiers themselves, so they will help control like the microphone and the speaker. In that sense, what it does is allow it not to short out the amplifier. Like if you were to just hook up that wire and that wire to the input or output, you can only go to a certain volume before you break that thing, because it will just short out. It's not meant to do that. It's got to have a certain amount of coiled turns and stuff like a speaker does. It's got to have a certain amount of resistance in ohms in order for it not to short out. But this will help me do that. Cool part is like I said, these run off of current, so all I have to do is grab the current from the wireless electricity in the air and put it into here and put the ground with the rest of the grounds. As long as I have a solid ground, I should be good. I just don't want my ground to be something where you're going automatically to earth ground, like with a rod or a big wire or a cable, because what happens is all the wireless electricity from the Tesla coil will just start going to that ground, and then none of your wireless stuff that you're trying to do will work. So that's kind of a weird thing, because when Tesla was inventing these things, it was like you wanted current to go through the air, but you kind of wanted it to go through the earth. So you could plug anything into the earth, and the air is always there, so you can plug anything in anywhere as long as you had these special adapters that went into the ground, and it can, with like a converter, like a little antenna thing that would grab one current from the air and then one current from the earth, and then there's your current that you would use all the time. And all you would have to have is like a spike thing that went into the ground that had basically an antenna on one side and a prod on the other side that went into the ground. That's your negative, and the positive is the one that's up in the air. And then you plug in anything into that, kind of. That's kind of like, he used to walk around with a light bulb thing and put it in the ground and test it out that way and see how far he can go. And he got pretty far, like with his wireless electricity that he can make. Far enough to burn out generators in the next city over and things like that, where he had to rebuild people's generators and stuff because of his experiments were doing what I'm talking about, where they were shorting out other things that are using friction and current, and he's adding to the current in the air, so those things with friction that are already kind of pushing away electrons and stuff, they're actually now receiving those electrons wirelessly and absorbing into the coils in the generators and then burning them up, making them go too fast, making them produce too much electricity. And back then they just didn't have like the capability of adjusting all that stuff right away. It would be like more like these big giant things they would have to tune to make it like actually like flow correctly. So he had to like rebuild a few things for people and build like kind of like what I was talking about, like a Faraday cage around their generators, in order for them not to be affected anymore by his stuff, by his experiments. So that's kind of what I have to do now, whereas I have to build protection around the things that I want to use. That way you can use them all together and it can kind of serve a bigger purpose and function. I'm sure there's a lot more to this if someone really understood like the electronics of all this a lot better than me. Definitely probably can take this idea of looping back feedback audio into a resonating plasma field. This is kind of like how